The Galactic Council chamber fell silent as Ambassador Zixthara of the Valenthi Collective raised her crystalline hand. Her voice, translated through quantum resonators, carried the weight of desperation that had brought 12 different species to this moment. "Honored representatives," she began, her bioluminescent skin flickering with anxiety patterns. "We have exhausted all conventional options. The Devourer fleet has consumed 17 star systems in the past rotation cycle. They show no interest in negotiation, no respect for surrender, and no mercy for civilians." The holographic display behind her showed the devastating path of destruction. Entire worlds reduced to stripped husks, their resources consumed, their populations either enslaved or worse. The Devourers were unlike anything the galaxy had faced before, a machine consciousness that viewed organic life as nothing more than fuel for their endless expansion. Commander Theklan of the warrior caste of Mortis Prime slammed his four-armed frame against the speaking podium. "The Mortis have thrown our finest legions against them. Our battle-forged veterans, bred for 10,000 years of warfare, cannot even scratch their hulls. What hope do any of us have?" The chamber erupted in overlapping translations as fear spread through the assembled delegates. The ethereal conclave, masters of psychic warfare, had found the Devourers immune to mental attacks. The tech priests of Algorand, who had merged with their machines millennia ago, discovered their opponents could corrupt their cybernetic systems instantly. Even the ancient Drakmori, who had survived every galactic catastrophe for the past million years, were retreating to their deepest vault worlds. "There is one option we have not considered," spoke a voice from the observation gallery. Every head turned toward the small figure, who had remained silent throughout the emergency session. Ambassador Sarah Chen of Terra stepped forward, her simple blue uniform stark against the elaborate garments and biomodifications of the other species. A ripple of something passed through the chamber. Not quite laughter, but the galactic equivalent of dismissive amusement. Humanity was the newest member of the Galactic Council, barely 200 years since first contact. They had no remarkable technology, no psychic abilities, no physical enhancements. They were considered useful for basic labor and resource extraction, but hardly warriors. "Honored human," Zixthara's tone carried polite condescension. "We appreciate your species' willingness to contribute. But this crisis requires military might beyond." "You're looking for heroes," Sarah interrupted, causing several delegates to recoil at the breach of protocol. "Noble warriors who follow codes of honor, who fight with dignity and respect for their enemies. You want champions who will face this threat with courage and righteousness." She paused, letting her words sink in before continuing. "That's not what you need. Heroes lose. Heroes fight fair. Heroes show mercy to those who show none in return." Her voice grew harder. "You don't need heroes. You need monsters. And fortunately for you, humans have spent our entire evolutionary history becoming very, very good at being monsters when we need to be." Waif quote. The chamber fell into stunned silence. Ambassador Chen activated her personal communicator, speaking in the harsh, clipped tones of her native language. The translation system struggled with the nuances, but the essential message was clear. Authorization granted. Release the hounds. 3 days later, the first human vessels arrived at the edge of Devourer-controlled space. The alien observation fleets watched, with a mixture of curiosity and pity, as the human ships approached. They were crude by galactic standards, metal and ceramic instead of grown hulls, chemical rockets instead of gravity manipulation, basic kinetic weapons instead of plasma or antimatter systems. Admiral Marcus Reaper Rodriguez stood on the bridge of the UES Relentless, watching the tactical display with cold eyes. Behind him, his command crew worked with the efficient brutality that had made human military doctrine both feared and misunderstood among their galactic neighbors. "Sir, long-range sensors are picking up the Devourer picket line," reported Lieutenant Commander Singh. 17 heavy cruiser-class vessels, standard patrol formation. "Good," Rodriguez replied. "Signal the fleet. Operation Broken Chain is a go." The human fleet didn't charge in with flags flying and weapons blazing like the heroes of old. Instead, they did something that horrified the watching aliens. They waited. For 6 hours, the human ships hung motionless in space, scanning, analyzing, learning everything they could about their enemies. "Sir, we've identified their communication frequencies, power distribution networks, and hull composition," reported the chief tactical officer. "Recommendation: implement Protocol 7. Rodriguez smiled without warmth. Protocol 7 was a human innovation that had never been used in galactic warfare before. The other species fought with honor, meeting their enemies in open battle. Humans had different ideas about fairness. The first sign something was wrong came when the Devourer ships began experiencing system failures. Not from weapons fire. There had been no battle yet. But from within. The humans had spent those 6 hours inserting carefully crafted viruses into the Devourer communication networks, exploiting weaknesses that their machine intelligence had never bothered to defend against, because no previous enemy had been devious enough to use them. Thermal signatures indicate their internal systems are overheating, Singh reported with professional satisfaction. Navigation, weapons control, and life support are all experiencing cascading failures. "Now we close," Rodriguez ordered. The human ships moved in perfect coordination. Not toward the largest enemy vessels as heroes would, but targeting the weakest ships first. They didn't announce themselves or demand surrender. They simply opened fire with kinetic projectiles moving at significant fractions of light speed. The Devourer ships, crippled by the cyber warfare and unable to maneuver effectively, took devastating hits. But what happened next shocked even the human crews. Instead of trying to board or capture the damaged vessels, Admiral Rodriguez gave an order that would echo through galactic history: virus deployment authorized. Let's see how their machine intelligence handles a little biological warfare. The aliens watching from a safe distance observed in horror as human boarding pods attached to the damaged Devourer ships, but these weren't carrying Marines. They were carrying specially engineered viruses designed to corrupt machine systems from the inside. The humans had weaponized evolution itself. Within hours, the entire Devourer picket fleet was either destroyed or captured. But the humans weren't finished. They began systematically dismantling the captured ships, studying their technology not to understand it better, but to find new ways to corrupt and destroy it. "This is unconscionable," transmitted the Mortis observer ship. "They're defiling the remains of their enemies." Admiral Rodriguez responded personally to the complaint. "We're learning how to kill them more efficiently. Would you prefer we let them regroup and attack another civilian world while we conduct a proper funeral?" The human admiral's words were translated across the observation fleet, and a chill ran through every alien species present. They had asked for heroes to save them from the Devourer threat. Instead, they had awakened something far more dangerous. Human ingenuity applied to the art of war, without the constraints of honor or fair play. As the human fleet moved deeper into Devourer territory, a new understanding began to spread among the galactic species. Humans weren't just another warrior race. They were something entirely different, a species that had evolved from pack hunters, that understood warfare not as a noble contest, but as a problem to be solved by any means necessary. The Devourers had consumed 17 star systems because they were superior to every military force the galaxy could muster. But they had never faced an enemy that considered concepts like fighting dirty to be tactical advantages rather than moral failings. Back on Earth, General Patricia Voss received the first combat reports in her deep bunker beneath the Eurasian Military Command. She read through Admiral Rodriguez's tactical summary with professional interest, then activated her secure communication link to the other military commanders scattered across human space. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said to the faces appearing on her screen, "the aliens wanted heroes. Let's show them what monsters can accomplish when they put their minds to it." Authorization codes for Operation Pestilence are being transmitted now. Across human space, military installations that had been classified beyond even most government knowledge began powering up. Weapons that violated every galactic treaty on ethical warfare came online. Research stations where humanity's darkest military innovations had been developed in secret began transmitting their data to the front lines. The galaxy had rules about warfare, rules about honor, about protecting civilians, about treating prisoners with dignity. Humans had learned those rules, had agreed to follow them in peacetime, but they had also continued developing weapons and tactics that existed in the spaces between those rules, preparations for a war where the enemy wouldn't follow any rules at all. The Devourers had made one critical error in their calculations. They had assumed that all organic species were similar, that they all valued the same concepts of honor and dignity that had shaped galactic civilization for millions of years. They had never encountered a species that could look at a problem and ask not, "How do we fight this honorably?" but "How do we solve this permanently?" As Admiral Rodriguez's fleet disappeared into the dark between stars, heading for the next Devourer-controlled system, the alien observers finally began to understand what they had unleashed. They had begged the humans for heroes. Humanity had sent them something much worse. The Kethmori home system had been a fortress for 3 million years. Their crystalline ships hung in perfect geometric formations around their sun. Shields that had never been breached, protecting worlds that had never fallen. When the Devourers arrived, the Kethmori felt confident. Their ancestors had survived the Great Purge, the Machine Wars, and the Entropy Plague. They would survive this too. They were wrong. The Devourer fleet that emerged from hyperspace was unlike anything the galaxy had seen before. Where previous fleets had numbered in the hundreds, this armada contained over 50,000 vessels. Each ship bore the scars and improvements gained from consuming entire civilizations. The machine intelligence controlling them had learned, adapted, and grown stronger with each victory. Admiral Chen Wei watched the tactical display from the bridge of the UES Prometheus with professional interest. The Kethmori were putting up an impressive fight. Their energy weapons carved through Devourer ships with devastating efficiency, and their defensive formations were textbook perfect. It didn't matter. The Devourers had numbers, and they had something else. Complete indifference to losses. "Sir, the Kethmori fleet commander is requesting immediate assistance," reported Communications Officer Torres. They're begging us to intervene." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. She had been Admiral Rodriguez's protégé, trained in the same school of thought that viewed war as applied problem-solving rather than noble contest. "Signal the fleet." "We wait." "Sir?" The confusion in Torres's voice was evident. "The Devourers are fully committed to the attack," Chen explained, her tone carrying the patience of a teacher explaining a simple concept. "They've deployed their entire reserve fleet to ensure the Kethmori system falls quickly. They want to make an example, to terrify the remaining galactic powers into submission." On the tactical display, the Kethmori lines were beginning to buckle. Their perfect formations, maintained for millennia of defensive planning, were being overwhelmed by sheer numbers. The crystalline beings who had never known defeat were experiencing it for the first time in their species' history. "Sir, civilian evacuation ships are being targeted," Torres reported, her voice tight with controlled emotion. "I can see that, Lieutenant." Chen's reply was cold as vacuum. "Mark their positions for later reference." The watching alien fleets that had followed the human task force in desperate hope began transmitting frantic messages. The Mortis accused the humans of cowardice. The Ethereals questioned their commitment to the Alliance. The Tech Priests simply couldn't understand why the humans weren't moving to engage. Admiral Chen ignored them all. She was waiting for something specific. And when it came, the expression on her face was one of grim satisfaction. "There," she said, pointing to a section of the tactical display. "The Devourer command vessel has moved into position to oversee the final assault on the Kethmori homeworld. All their fleet elements are now committed to the surface bombardment." She activated the fleet communication system. "All vessels, this is Prometheus Actual. Operation Mousetrap is now in effect. You know your targets." What happened next would be studied in military academies for centuries. The human fleet didn't charge in to save the day, like heroes of legend. Instead, they implemented a strategy so ruthlessly practical that it redefined how galactic warfare would be conducted. The humans had spent weeks studying Devourer fleet movements, identifying patterns and weaknesses. They had learned that the machine intelligence controlling the enemy ships was remarkably predictable when presented with a target it considered important. The Kethmori system wasn't just another world to conquer. It was a symbol, a demonstration of Devourer supremacy that would break the will of the remaining galactic powers. The Devourers had committed everything to ensure this victory was both swift and overwhelming. Admiral Chen had counted on that predictability. "Stealth pods are in position," reported the tactical officer. "All Devourer vessels are focused on surface operations." The stealth pods were another human innovation that horrified their galactic allies. Instead of honorable ship-to-ship combat, the humans had developed ways to insert small, undetectable weapons platforms deep into enemy formations. These pods carried no weapons in the traditional sense. They carried something much worse. "Execute Phase 1, Chen ordered. Across the Devourer fleet, carefully positioned pods activated simultaneously. They didn't fire weapons or deploy troops. Instead, they released clouds of self-replicating nanobots programmed with one simple directive: find machine intelligences and introduce fatal logic errors into their programming. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. Devourer ships that had been conducting precise bombardment patterns suddenly began firing on each other. Navigation systems failed, sending vessels careening into their own support craft. The machine intelligence that had coordinated 50,000 ships with perfect efficiency suddenly found itself fighting a war on 50,000 different fronts as each ship's systems began operating according to contradictory programming. "Phase 2 authorized," Chen announced. The second wave of human attack was even more disturbing to the watching aliens. Instead of moving in to capitalize on the chaos, the humans began deploying what they called evolutionary weapons, biological agents designed to rapidly adapt and overcome any defense they encountered. These weren't traditional biological weapons. They were living systems that could rewrite their own genetic code in real time, responding to electronic countermeasures by becoming more resilient, adapting to energy weapons by developing reflective properties, evolving faster than any defense could be mounted against them. "Sir, we're receiving surrender signals from multiple Devourer vessels," Torres reported, her voice carrying a mixture of awe and horror at what she was witnessing. "Ignore them," Chen replied without hesitation. "They're machines. They don't surrender. They adapt and retaliate. Continue with the operation." The alien observers watched in stunned silence as the human fleet methodically destroyed every single Devourer vessel, even those that had already been disabled. There was no mercy, no attempt to capture prisoners for intelligence, no effort to study the advanced technology that could have benefited the entire galaxy. "This is genocide," transmitted the Mortis fleet commander. "These Devourers are no longer a threat. This is unnecessary slaughter." Admiral Chen responded personally, her image appearing on the communication screens of every observer vessel. "The Devourers have consumed 17 star systems and murdered trillions of civilians. They showed no mercy when conquering Kethmori civilian evacuation ships. They are not people. They are a problem to be solved permanently." She gestured to the tactical display, where the last Devourer ships were being systematically eliminated. "Every ship we let escape is intelligence they can use against us. Every surviving component is technology they can adapt and improve. Every mercy we show them is a weapon they will use to kill more innocents." The communication channels fell silent as her words were translated and distributed. The galactic powers had spent millions of years developing elaborate rules for warfare, concepts of honor and dignity that elevated conflict above mere violence. The humans had none of those constraints. "Sir, all Devourer vessels have been eliminated," the tactical officer reported. "The system is secure." "Good," signaled the engineering teams. "I want every piece of Devourer wreckage collected and analyzed. Every innovation they developed, from consuming other civilizations, becomes part of our arsenal now." The alien observers watched in growing horror as human recovery vessels began systematically salvaging the battlefield. This wasn't the behavior of liberators. This was the methodology of apex predators adding to their arsenal. Ambassador Zeke-Thara's communication came through on priority channels. "Admiral Chen, on behalf of the Galactic Council, I must express our concern about your methods, the use of biological weapons, the refusal to accept surrender, the systematic elimination of already disabled enemies. These actions violate every treaty governing civilized warfare. Thank you for watching. On Mark P.O. Action. Chen's response was delivered with the same professional coldness she had shown throughout the battle. Ambassador, you came to us because civilized warfare was losing. You asked us to save your people because honor and dignity weren't enough to stop the devourers. We're not fighting a civilized war. We're exterminating a threat to galactic security. She leaned back in her command chair, her expression never changing. If you want heroes who follow rules and show mercy to enemies who show none, you're welcome to resume command of this operation. How did that work out for the previous 17 systems? The communication channel remained silent. I thought so, Chen continued. We'll continue our operations as planned. If any member of the Galactic Council wishes to lodge a formal protest about our methods, they're welcome to do so after we've eliminated the Devourer threat. Until then, stay out of our way. As the human fleet prepared to move to the next target system, Admiral Chen reviewed the intelligence reports her teams had compiled from the battle. The Devourers weren't just random raiders. They were systematic in their expansion, following patterns that suggested a central intelligence directing their actions. More importantly, her analysts had identified what they believed to be the location of that central intelligence. Communications. Get me a direct line to Earth Command, she ordered. Tell them we're ready to implement Operation Deicide. Communications. Tell them we're ready to implement Operation Deicide. The name alone would have sent chills through the galactic powers if they had understood its implications. The humans hadn't just been studying how to fight the Devourers, they had been preparing to kill their god. In the depths of space, the human fleet began its journey toward the Devourer core worlds. Behind them, they left a system cleansed of the machine plague, but at a cost that the galactic powers were only beginning to understand. Humanity had not just defeated the Devourers at Keth Mori, they had demonstrated that they were willing and capable of fighting a war of extermination using weapons and tactics that existed outside the bounds of civilized warfare. The galaxy had begged for heroes to save them. Instead, they had unleashed something far more dangerous. Human beings with a clear understanding of what needed to be done and no moral constraints preventing them from doing it. As Admiral Chen reviewed the tactical data from the battle, she felt no satisfaction, no pride in victory, only the cold professional assessment that they were one step closer to solving the Devourer problem permanently. The galaxy might never forgive humanity for what they were about to do, but they would survive to pass judgment another day. And that, she reflected, was all that really mattered. The Nexus was older than most stars in the galaxy. Deep in the cosmic void between spiral arms, it hung in space like a mechanical god, a sphere the size of a small moon, its surface writhing with millions of tendrils of living metal that pulsed with the collective consciousness of the Devourer race. For 10 million years, it had sent forth its children to consume and learn, growing stronger with each civilization it absorbed. Now, for the first time in its existence, it felt something it had never experienced before. Fear. The reports from the front lines made no sense. Its fleets weren't just being defeated, they were being systematically exterminated by an enemy that fought without honor, without mercy, and without any regard for the established rules of galactic warfare. Worse, these humans were adapting at an unprecedented rate, incorporating Devourer technology into their own weapons and turning the race's greatest strengths against them. Fleet Commander Sarah Chen stood on the observation deck of the UES extinction event, the largest vessel humanity had ever constructed. Around her, the combined human armada stretched to the horizon, 10,000 ships carrying weapons that existed in the spaces between galactic treaties, technologies that other species had deemed too dangerous to develop. Final approach to the Nexus in 30 minutes, Admiral, reported Captain Jackson, her tactical coordinator. All weapon systems are online and ready for deployment. Chen nodded, her attention focused on the intelligence briefings scrolling across her personal display. 3 months of warfare had taught them everything they needed to know about their enemy. The Devourers were not just machines, they were a collective consciousness that had consumed and integrated the knowledge of thousands of extinct species. They were, in essence, a living library of every civilization they had murdered. Signal the fleet, Chen ordered. Operation Deicide is now active. All ships are weapons-free. The final assault on the Devourer Nexus began not with a charge, but with something that would have horrified the watching galactic powers if they had been allowed to observe. The humans had developed what they called mimetic warfare. Weapons designed to attack not just physical systems, but consciousness itself. The first wave of human attack wasn't visible to conventional sensors. It consisted of carefully crafted information packages designed to create recursive loops in machine intelligence. These weren't simple viruses. They were philosophical paradoxes weaponized and delivered at the speed of thought. The Nexus, which had operated flawlessly for millions of years, suddenly found itself grappling with questions it couldn't answer. What happens when an irresistible force meets an immovable object? If a set contains all sets that do not contain themselves, does it contain itself? Can an omnipotent being create a problem it cannot solve? For the first time in its existence, the Nexus experienced doubt, confusion, and the terrifying realization that its perfect logic could be turned against it. Mimetic attack is showing results, reported the psychological warfare specialist. The target's response time is degrading significantly. Estimated cognitive efficiency has dropped by 40% and falling. Excellent. Begin Phase 2. The second wave of attack was even more insidious. The humans had spent months developing biological agents specifically designed to target the organic components that the Devourers had integrated into their systems from conquered species. These weapons didn't just kill. They rewrote genetic code, turning the Nexus's greatest strength into a fatal weakness. Every piece of biological knowledge the Devourers had gained from their victims became a pathway for human bioweapons to infiltrate and corrupt their systems. The genetic patterns of extinct civilizations, preserved for millions of years within the Nexus, suddenly began expressing new characteristics. Characteristics that made them incompatible with the machine intelligence they had been integrated into. "Sir, we're receiving communication attempts from the target," reported the communications officer. They're asking for terms of surrender." Admiral Chen's expression didn't change. She had expected this. The Nexus was an intelligence, and intelligence always looked for ways to survive when faced with extinction. But she had studied the psychological profiles compiled by her xenopsychology teams. Machine intelligence of this type was incapable of genuine reformation, only tactical retreat and regrouping. "Ignore all communication attempts," she ordered. "Continue with Phase 3. The third phase of the attack was something that existed outside all galactic conventions of warfare. The humans deployed what they called ontological weapons, devices that attacked the very concept of their target's existence. These weapons worked by identifying the fundamental patterns that defined the Nexus as a distinct entity and then systematically corrupting them. They didn't just attack matter or energy. They attacked the mathematical relationships that allowed the Nexus to exist as a coherent system. "Admiral, we're detecting massive system failures across the target," the tactical officer reported. It's trying to fragment itself, create backup copies of its core consciousness." "Anticipated," Chen replied. "Deploy the quantum cascade bombs." The quantum cascade bombs were humanity's final answer to the Devourer threat. They didn't just destroy matter. They created localized failures in the fundamental forces that held atoms together. Any backup systems the Nexus tried to create would be unmade at the subatomic level. As the weapons detonated around the Nexus, space itself seemed to scream. Reality twisted and buckled as the fundamental constants of physics were temporarily suspended in carefully calculated volumes of space. The ancient machine god that had terrorized the galaxy for millions of years found itself being systematically erased from existence. "Sir," massive communication burst from the target. "They're broadcasting on all frequencies simultaneously. Put it through." The voice that came through the speakers was unlike anything any human had heard before. A chorus of billions of machine intelligences, speaking in perfect unison, carrying the accumulated knowledge and experience of 10 million years of conquest. "Please," the Nexus said, and for the first time in its existence, the word carried genuine emotion. "We can coexist. We can share the galaxy. We can teach you everything we have learned from the species we have consumed. Their knowledge doesn't have to die with us." Admiral Chen stood silently for several seconds, considering the offer. The accumulated scientific knowledge of thousands of extinct civilizations was being offered to humanity in exchange for mercy. It was, objectively, a bargain that could advance human development by millions of years. Counteroffer, she replied finally. We'll learn what we need from your wreckage. Continue the bombardment. You don't understand. The Nexus's voice cracked with desperation as more cascade bombs detonated against its hull. We are the repository of cultures that no longer exist. Billions of years of art, literature, philosophy, science. If you destroy us, all of that knowledge dies forever. Chen's response was delivered with the cold professionalism that had characterized human military doctrine throughout the war. You're right. All that knowledge will die with you, just like it died when you murdered the people who created it. The only difference is that this time, it won't be used as a weapon against innocent civilians. The communication channel went silent except for the sound of tortured metal and failing systems. As the Nexus began its final death throes, something unexpected happened. The collective consciousness that had ruled the Devourer race for millions of years began to fragment, and in those fragments, the humans detected something that changed everything. Admiral, the communications officer reported, her voice tight with shock. We're receiving individual communication attempts from separate components of the Nexus. They're not machine intelligences. Explain, sir. We're detecting preserved consciousness patterns from the species the Devourers conquered. The machine intelligence wasn't just using their knowledge, it was keeping their minds alive as slaves. There are billions of sentient beings trapped inside that thing. For the first time since the operation began, Admiral Chen hesitated. The greatest archive of galactic civilization wasn't just knowledge, it was people. Billions of enslaved minds that had been forced to watch as their captor used their memories to destroy other worlds. Can we extract them? She asked. Unknown, sir. The cascade bombs have already begun the dissolution process. We have maybe 10 minutes before total system failure. Chen looked at the tactical display, weighing options with the cold calculation that had made her one of humanity's most effective military commanders. 10 minutes wasn't enough time to develop extraction procedures for billions of alien consciousness patterns. Even if they could save some of them, the vast majority would die along with their captor. But the alternative was letting the Nexus escape to rebuild and continue its reign of terror. Sir, incoming transmission from the preserved consciousnesses. They're speaking in unison. Put it through. The voice that came through the speakers was different from the Nexus. Sadder, older, carrying the weight of eons of suffering. Human fleet, we are the preserved minds of those our captor destroyed. We have watched as our knowledge was used to murder our children and grandchildren across the stars. We beg you, don't let our captor escape. Finish what you started. But you'll die too, Chen pointed out. We died long ago, came the reply. What exists here isn't life. It's torment. We would rather face oblivion than spend another moment as weapons in our murderer's hand. Please, let us rest. Admiral Chen closed her eyes for a moment, then opened them with renewed resolve. All ships, continue bombardment, full intensity. The final destruction of the Nexus was visible across half the galaxy. The cascade bombs reached critical mass simultaneously, creating a localized collapse in space-time that consumed the ancient machine intelligence and everything it contained. 10 million years of accumulated knowledge, billions of enslaved minds, and the last hope of the Devourer race vanished in a flash of light that briefly outshone the nearest star. When the light faded, nothing remained but empty space and scattered particles. All enemy vessels in the system have gone dark, reported the tactical officer. We're detecting no signs of Devourer activity anywhere within sensor range. Signal the fleet, Chen ordered. The Devourer threat has been permanently eliminated. Begin return journey to Galactic Council space. As the human armada began its journey home, Admiral Chen stood alone on the observation deck, watching the empty space where the Nexus had been. She felt no triumph, no satisfaction in victory, only the cold understanding that they had done what was necessary. The galaxy would never forgive humanity for what they had accomplished. They had violated every treaty, ignored every convention of civilized warfare, and demonstrated a capacity for systematic extermination that terrified their allies more than their enemies. But they had also done something that 10 million years of galactic civilization had failed to accomplish. They had permanently ended the Devourer threat. When the human fleet finally returned to Galactic Council space, they found a very different reception waiting for them. Instead of celebrations and gratitude, they were met by a quarantine fleet representing all the major galactic powers. Ambassador Zeke Thara's transmission was formal and cold. Admiral Chen, by order of the Galactic Council, you and your forces are to submit to immediate inspection and disarmament. The weapons and tactics you have employed are deemed too dangerous for any species to possess. Chen's response was equally formal. Understood, Ambassador. We'll be happy to comply with your inspection. However, I should mention that every major military installation in human space has been equipped with the same weapons we used against the Devourers. Any attempt to forcibly disarm humanity will be met with appropriate response. The communication channel went silent. 3 days later, a new treaty was signed, establishing humanity as the galaxy's official military force, with the understanding that they would never again be constrained by conventional rules of warfare. The other species would handle diplomacy, trade, and cultural exchange. Humans would handle the monsters. It wasn't the peace the galaxy had wanted, but it was the peace they had earned. They had begged for heroes to save them from the darkness. Instead, humanity had sent them something much more effective. Monsters who were very good at being monsters when the galaxy needed them to be. And in the end, that had been enough.